I take this time to talk about the President's strategy on combating the threat of ISIL or ISIS. I applaud the President's recognition that ISIL is a barbaric terrorist group. It beheaded Americans, it murders, kidnaps, tortures civilian populations, it sells women into slavery. It has a stated purpose of attacking America and its allies. It poses a threat. And the President is right to say that it calls on appropriate action by the international community. I support and congratulate the President on the selective military strikes that have been done with the request of the Iraqi government against ISIL's advancements, which has held them back and been able to regain territory that was held by ISIL, protecting civilian populations. I strongly support the President's commitment that there will be no combat ground troops interjected into this combat. And I think the President has done a good job in engaging the international community to work with us so that this is truly an international effort. But let me just comment for a moment, if I might, about military action and that it needs to be restricted. I oppose authorizing military use of force that is open-ended, that could result in the use of ground troops, or where we could be asked to have our military do what the countries where these terrorist groups are located should be doing with their own military. In Iraq, it should be the Iraqi security forces that take on the ground responsibilities. And let me just remind my colleagues, when we went into Iraq, and it was done without my support, I voted against the authorization to go into Iraq, we were told that that was going to be a short campaign, that the might of the military of the United States would make that a very quick operation. As we see years later, it took a long time, and we're still in Iraq. It must be done with the help of the international community, particularly the countries that are in the region. I think we have a strong responsibility as members of the Senate and members of Congress to revisit the 2001 authorization that was passed by Congress shortly after the attack on our country on September the 11th, and the 2002 authorization that was used for Americans going into Iraq. I don't think either one of those resolutions are relevant for additional military action today in either Syria or Iraq. And let me, Mr. President, just read into the record the appropriate language that was included in the 2001 authorization, that the President is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attack that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons. It's a real stretch to say that that authority applies to actions against ISIL today. Therefore, I think it's incumbent. I think we have a constitutional responsibility to act. And I think we must act and make it very clear that there will be no ground combat troops authorized in any action taken by Congress. In regards to Iraq, the Iraq resolution was passed at a time where the information supplied to Congress was just not accurate. It's certainly not relevant to a fact that now there's an independent Iraqi government. That authorization also needs to be revisited. And let me just remind you, if this administration can use the authority of 01 and 02 for using aircraft and military operations by air, what is to say that the next administration, because we know this is going to take a long time, couldn't use that authorization for introducing ground troops in these countries? So I think it's important that we revisit these authorizations, eliminate the previous authorizations, and make it relevant to the current need. In Iraq, it's got to be limited to strategic air missions requested by the Iraqi government, targeted at protecting civilian populations. In regards to Syria, I have serious doubt about authorizing military operation. I think we need to have further clarification from the administration as to the clear objectives that they're accomplishing in Syria, and we have to be very careful about the authorization of the use of our military in a country where we are not invited. Now, let me just talk 1 minute about timing. The The president has Article 2 powers. I don't deny that. So if something were to happen, he has the right to defend our country and use our military to defend our country. And you know, he can do that for a period of 60 days. Well, so happens 60 days from now, we'll be soon to be returning for a lame duck session of Congress. So I don't think there's any immediate rush for us to try to get an authorization bill done. But I think we should be working on an authorization bill so that we can take it up when Congress reconvenes. And if something happens in the interim, we are certainly available and should come back in and be ready to act. America is always stronger when Congress and administration work together on these issues, and I would hope that we could come together with the appropriate authorization that makes it clear that we will not allow authorization for combat ground troops, and that we're very restricted on the use of our air power. Let me lastly comment about the continuing resolution that we will be voting on tomorrow, as I understand it, that gives Article 10 power for the arming and equipping the Syrian opposition. There is clear in that authorization that there is no authorization for the use of U.S. military force. It is consistent with the action taken by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that I serve on and the resolution that I supported that talked about arming and training the vetted Syrian opposition. We did that over a year ago. It was for a different mission. It was for dealing with Assad. This, in a way, is comparable dealing with ISIL, but it also deals with the capacities against Assad. It's limited to expire on December the 11th, and I think it is consistent with our mission to deal with our policies in Syria. As I said earlier, I voted against the Iraq authorization in 2002. I see that you've got to be very careful that we do not allow authorization to exist that could be used for a long and costly involvement of the United States. It's also clear to me that we cannot win the campaign against ISIL by military action alone. We have to have diplomatic support. We have to deal with cutting off their financial aid. We have to deal with cutting off their political support. In Iraq, we have a representative government. The seeds have been planted. That's what we need to do. That cuts off the type of support that ISIL will need for long-term survival. The international community needs to stay resolved, and the United States needs to stay in the leadership.